Most societies do not fragment because people suddenly stop living next to each other. They fragment because people stop trusting each other. Trust that institutions are fair. Trust that rules apply equally. Trust that other groups inside society still see themselves as part of the same larger system. And once that trust begins weakening, society starts changing in ways that are often difficult to reverse. People withdraw into smaller groups. Shared realities begin breaking apart. Coordination becomes harder. Political conflict intensifies. Institutions struggle to maintain legitimacy across increasingly divided populations. So why does this happen? Why do complex societies gradually lose the social cohesion that once helped hold them together? This is not a new pattern. In the later years of the Soviet Union, many institutions still functioned formally, but growing numbers of people no longer believed the official system reflected reality. The structures remained in place, but trust in the shared narrative holding society together had already begun weakening. The pattern repeats across civilizations and across time. It happens not because societies suddenly become irrational or immoral, but because complex societies depend on invisible forms of coordination that are easy to overlook while they are functioning. In this episode, you'll understand how declining trust, institutional pressure, polarization, and fragmentation begin reinforcing each other inside complex societies, and why societies often become harder to hold together once shared trust begins weakening. So the question is, what happens when people no longer trust the same institutions, the same information, or even each other? In the previous episode, we explored how institutions can become more rigid, internally focused, and increasingly difficult to reform as complexity grows. But institutions do not exist separately from society. They depend on trust, legitimacy, and society's willingness to coordinate around them. And once trust in institutions begins weakening, another pressure begins spreading through society itself. Social cohesion starts weakening as well. Most people rarely think about trust while society is functioning normally, but trust acts like invisible infrastructure inside complex societies. People stop at traffic lights, assuming others will do the same. Businesses sign contracts assuming legal systems will function. Citizens follow rules assuming institutions are legitimate. People cooperate with strangers because they expect society to remain relatively predictable. As societies become larger and more interconnected, maintaining shared trust becomes more difficult. Different groups experience society differently. Economic conditions diverge. Information environments fragment. Cultural norms evolve in different directions. Institutions face pressure from populations with increasingly diverse expectations, priorities, and interpretations of reality. At first, these differences can coexist without major instability, but shared understanding often begins weakening underneath. And once groups inside the same society begin interpreting events through entirely different frameworks, coordination itself becomes more difficult. Two neighbors watch the same event unfold on their phones. One sees proof the system is collapsing. The other sees proof the public is being manipulated into panic. Both believe they are seeing reality clearly, not because one side is lying, but because people increasingly operate inside different informational, social, and institutional environments that shape how reality itself is interpreted. As shared reality weakens, trust often weakens with it. Institutions become affected by this fragmentation as well. As we explored earlier in the series, institutions rely not only on formal authority, but also on legitimacy and public trust. But once different groups inside society stop trusting the same institutions, maintaining legitimacy becomes increasingly difficult. One group may see an institution as necessary and stabilizing. Another may see the same institution as corrupt, ineffective, politicized, or disconnected from reality. And once legitimacy fragments across society, institutions increasingly struggle to coordinate through voluntary trust alone. This creates a reinforcing loop inside complex societies. Declining trust makes coordination harder. Harder coordination increases pressure on institutions. Institutions respond with more oversight, more management, more control mechanisms, and more attempts to stabilize fragmentation. But these responses can themselves increase perceptions of distance, rigidity, and institutional overreach, which can weaken trust even further. Society may continue functioning normally on the surface. Elections continue, institutions remain in place. Daily life largely goes on, but the social experience underneath begins changing. People withdraw into smaller communities and information networks. Shared institutions lose some of their unifying role. Public discourse becomes more hostile and less trusting. Families stop discussing certain topics not because they no longer care about each other, but because trust that a conversation can remain shared begins to disappear. And once fragmentation deepens, rebuilding trust becomes increasingly difficult. This is one of the paradoxes of complex societies. The more interconnected societies become technologically, economically, and institutionally, the easier it becomes for fragmentation to spread rapidly across the same networks that once increased coordination. The same phone that connects people to friends and family also connects them to entirely different realities, narratives, and interpretations of the world around them. Information systems that connect society can also divide it. This does not necessarily mean society collapses. Many fragmented societies continue functioning for long periods of time. But fragmentation changes how societies respond to pressure. Coordination slows, trust weakens, legitimacy becomes contested. Institutions face growing difficulty maintaining cohesion across a society no longer fully aligned in its expectations. And once trust begins weakening across multiple systems at the same time, even relatively small disruptions can create disproportionately large social reactions. Once you see this pattern, you begin recognizing it in specific signals. The first is institutional distrust. When large parts of society increasingly stop believing that major institutions operate fairly, competently, or in the public interest. The second is informational fragmentation. When different groups inside the same society increasingly rely on entirely different sources of information, authority, and interpretation. The third is social withdrawal. When people disengage from civic participation, avoid public discourse, or retreat into smaller social and ideological groups they still trust. These are not necessarily signs that society is collapsing. They are signs that social cohesion and shared trust may be weakening underneath the surface. Social fragmentation does not emerge from a single cause. Economic pressure, institutional rigidity, informational fragmentation, technological change, declining legitimacy, and growing complexity can all reinforce each other over time. And once fragmentation spreads across multiple parts of society simultaneously, maintaining cohesion becomes increasingly difficult. So what happens when fragmentation, institutional rigidity, declining trust, and systemic pressure all begin reinforcing each other at the same time? What happens when even relatively small disruptions begin triggering disproportionately large systemic reactions? That's what we'll explore in the next episode. Social fragmentation is part of TNBC Explainers Module 4, Systems, Complexity, and Decline. This is TNBC Explainers, understanding how the world actually works. Explore the TNBC Explainers course via the YouTube course list, or visit the nextbigcycle.world for the full course overview and background. This is the Next Big Cycle. TNBC Explainers. your guide to understanding the systems shaping the world around you. TNBC Explainers is a growing YouTube course. New concepts are added over time,